conscientism study class. But because today is, well, because we are in the season of African Liberation Day, we decided to hold two days of discussion and presentations and discussions in furtherance of the African Liberation Day, and so we are here. So I'm trying to get about that pigeon because it's not responding. Yes, brother Pigeon, are you able to? Are you able to speak? Are you able to speak?
Yes, I'm able to speak.
Okay, so just so we contacted Dr. Stephen last minute. Dr. Stephen is a member of the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute, of which we are all members. I'm a member. Brother Pigeon is also a member. Now, we contacted Dr. Stephen, but it was very late in the day, so not sure if he can present. But if he can, that would be great. In the meantime, Brother Pigeon did not, as he told me, get anyone who wanted to present on the topics for today. Brother Pigeon, the topics for today are, can you remind us again?
We have Dr. Maha who will be speaking on the medicine or the health sector, and also there's a Dr. Boaz who will be joining us to speak on health sector. So
for today?
Yes, we are focusing on
for today.
We are focusing on education, health, and the third one is economics. We are focusing on three: education, economics, and health. So already we have Dr. Maha here with us, and I know Dr. Boaz will be joining to speak on health a bit. And we can see, you say, Dr. Stephen, if you can be able, you can speak on education.
He's here. Brother Stephen, Dr. Stephen, are you able to do a presentation for us? No, it's very short notice.
Yes, I'll try. Yes, I'll try to give something, because I was preparing a speech for tomorrow, so it was mainly for tomorrow's lecture.
For tomorrow,
so,
yeah.
Yes.
We are also holding another meeting on Saturday.
Okay.
But the reason I contacted you and said if you could present is so that is because we have education today.
Yes.
So so if you're happy to, we shall be happy to listen to you, sir.
Yes. I'll try. Yes, I'll try to be.
Yeah,
let me some notes.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Let me do a bit of introduction. So, Brother Stephen, how do you pronounce your surname?
Okay, Piri.
Piri, right?
Yes, so, but it's a Piri from Malawi, but there's a Piri from Lesotho here in South Africa, and a Piri from Malawi, Zambia. But I'm Zimbabwean.
Yes. Right, it's interesting. So yeah, so Brother Piri is from Zimbabwe, as you said, but he lives in South Africa, where he's doing his he is a member of a faculty of a university that I know, and he's got a doctorate, and so he's Dr. Stephen Piri. Dr. Stephen and I met as joint executives, or we're both executives in the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. And for those of you who don't know, the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute was set up initially by Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah himself in Winneba, in Ghana. And it was the ideological, shall we say, it was the ideological spear of the political party that Nkrumah set up, which is a Convention People's Party. And anyone who had to be a minister of state in Ghana in those days had to undergo orientation. And the key orientation at that time was the very topics that we discuss here on Thursdays, which is philosophy and ideology, and socialism as an instrument of ideology. So one of the things that the ministers went through was a kind of educational orientation. And also, the CPP, the Convention People's Party, was the only party in Ghana at the time and one of the few on the continent that actually made party education one of the strengths of the party, one of the key departments of the party, because the CPP believe, Nkrumah believed that the party must always educate its members and educate the nation. So party education was central. And Brother Pigeon, who also has a political party in Kenya, has also adopted the same orientation. He's taken the position that his party will also make education a very important part of the party's work. So what it means is that ideological education is in itself a standalone, if you like, activity. So this is different from primary education in the country, in schools in the country, or secondary education in schools in the country, or shall we say university education and then the research institutes. Ideological education is it's a whole thing in itself, and that was the work of the party. I am not saying that Dr. Piri will present on ideological education, but he's welcome to if he wants. So Brother Piri, please, we'll hear from you. So Brother Pigeon, in what order shall we hear? So Brother Piri first, and then who next?
I will start with education by Brother Piri, and then we'll go to health. Dr. Ma is already here. Then we'll move to economics later.
Okay, and how long are they presenting?
A maximum of 15 minutes, because we need to have 30 minutes discussion on the same topic.
Okay, so shall we say that Dr. Piri will present, and then there'll be questions to him?
Yes.
After questions, then we'll open the floor for discussion. Then after that, we'll get presentation on health, and then questions to Brother, who will present on health, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. And then we'll get a presentation on economics. I think Brother Pigeon has done some research on that. If not, I will also chip in. As you know, my degree is in economics as well. So I can say a little bit about that. And then, again, we'll ask any questions to Brother Pigeon if he does that. And then we'll open the floor for discussion. So the time is 7:16, and we shall start with a presentation from Dr. Piri on education. Brother Piri, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Oh, thank you. It has been a long time.
Thank you.
Yes, education is very tricky because I come from a background whereby education is not only the one in class, but it's also for development. So you cannot think about education without development. So what I'm going to do here is I want to try to define what education is, but I want to give what is called a pseudo history of education. It helps. It's more like a theoretical framework of education. Yeah. So the idea, the clear definition of education that everyone else tends to get is whereby it's more like a transmission of knowledge. And it have got this assumption that on one end, there's a master who have got the knowledge, and the other end, there's sort of a student who's going to receive that particular knowledge. That is the assumption of education. So there's a transmission. And the master is the one who knows it all, and the student doesn't know it all. So the student has to listen to the master for him to gain the knowledge. That's how the definition of education has always been. So if you look at that process, it is what you call a linear way of transporting, or transmitting the knowledge from the master to the student. So the student cannot question the master because the student does not know. So the teacher becomes sort of a superior and inferior. That's how knowledge has been. That is what is called a traditional understanding of education. That's how it always has been. Yes. So this has been also one of the methods that have been used as far as we know, and the basic definition of education itself. So, but what was the purpose of education? The purpose of education was for someone else to learn. That's how it was. You are learning something. Okay. And also the teacher was to be given precedence and respect because he was giving knowledge to the students. So I want to emphasize on that. I think that that's very important as I move on to the shift of the definition of what an education is all about. Okay, so that it becomes more relevant to our situation today. So the idea was to say, if a teacher teaches a student and the student is a hard worker, the student can never be better than the teacher. If the student works very, very hard, the student will only be like the teacher. So the teacher will always have got this superiority. And also the conception of education was assumed as if education process was innocent. And the master was the one who was going to empower the student. Assumption of the power within that. Yeah. But there was a shift of knowledge which comes to our present argument of Africa, which we have now. So what happened was that the definition of education changes. How did it change? When it was realized that actually the master was not actually training the student to gain the knowledge that he has. It was not a transfer of knowledge as such. But the master was not even, the process itself was not innocent because the master started to manipulate education in order to indoctrinate the student so that the student becomes a perfect slave. That's how it changes. Okay. So when the transmission, so that means the transmission of knowledge was not to empower the student per se, but the one who had the knowledge was giving it to the other one so that he had an agenda, he or she had an agenda to manipulate the whole process. Okay. I think you might have an idea where I am going if you see it's like a story that sounds very innocent, but it's actually very radical, which education changes from just becoming education for knowledge sake, become what is called political education, radical education. That's how it works. When those ones who are in the process of learning realizes that we are not being taught here to be empowered, to be on ourselves, but we are being taught to be good slaves, subordinate. We are being brainwashed and indoctrinated. That is when those who are being indoctrinated realizes that this knowledge that they are being given is not good for them anymore. That is when the definition of what is called education changes to be what we have relatively now. So what is the definition of education now? Education stops to be just a process of learning. It becomes a process of unlearning, a process of de-learning, which is synonymous to decolonization. Why? The reason why it became like that is because when the one who was being educated realizes that I cannot only listen to the master because the master is not good for me. The master is come to tell me what to do, how I should behave, so that the master can control me and subjugate me. You see where I'm going now? Then the one who was being subjugated realizes that this education that I'm given is not good enough for me. What is it that I need to do? I need to do something about it. So the one who was being educated decided also to question whether or not the master had the real education that he needed, whether the knowledge was to be transmitted in one way or the knowledge was to be transmitted between the master and the student. I'm just trying to use this paradigm just as an example. So what happened was now the process of education cannot be defined by the transmission of knowledge only, because it's no longer a normal process. But if you want to be educated, you have to unlearn some of the habits that you have learned somewhere else. So the idea of education was now to be selective, to say, I will first try to unlearn what I was given, which is toxic to me, which makes me a subordinate of the one who's giving me. That's how education becomes changed. So the process of education becomes a process of not only learning, but also unlearning. Not only unlearning, but also relearning. That's where we start having now the present position of what education is all about. That's when we come to a point whereby we realize that education itself becomes a tool that can actually influence how we think, how we see ourselves, how we define ourselves. And even some things that we think are our personal convictions are actually not our personal convictions. Maybe our insecurities that we have, maybe we've been taught to be like that. That's when we even come to a point whereby we even accept our predicament. For example, if you say you are black, you are okay. Being black, it's okay for you, you are inferior. Being white is superior. We tend to believe those ideas. But those ideas come through that particular education of someone else who look at you, who look at your color and tell you straight that you are not worthy to be. That is the education that we are talking about. When you talk about Africa today, we are talking about different modes of education that have come in different sectors. But one thing that we know, when you talk about Pan-Africanism, you talk about Africa today, we're trying to think about what happened? Why are we here today? Why do we think the way we think? That's why you realize that there's one of the coincidence that I found very interesting. Like me, I follow Kwame Nkrumah a lot, but I realized that also a certain obsession with Fres Fanon. Then I realized that actually Kwame Nkrumah, when he was writing, that was the same time that Fres Fanon was also writing. When education was challenged, say, how do we start to think on our own as Black people? I used to give this good example that there was a time when I started my first master's. In that class, we were only 3 of us, 2 white people and me. We were master students. One was a lady and was a guy. Then when our marks were released, I had the highest mark. I couldn't believe it. I thought something was wrong because I never thought that a Black person would be able to get a mark which is higher than a white person. You see, those small conceptions of how we think about ourselves and how we see life. If I am to tell you today that everything that we are in today, the mess that Africa is in today, is because there was a particular master who taught us a particular education. And that education was passed intergenerations up to now. It have lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years up to this present day. So what is more interesting about what I'm trying to say is that the Ideological Institute, Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute, if you read about its history and how it was started, it's very interesting. If you want to understand it better, you just try to read some of the books that Kwame Nkrumah have written. And surprisingly and interestingly, Kwame Nkrumah is talking about what's called ideological indoctrination of a Black person. That a Black person in African is incapable and cannot do anything by themselves. So most of the things, most of the readings that are within that framework, you realize that they always talk about the issues of conscientization. One of the most famous scholar within the education sector is called Paulo Freire. His theory of what is called where he was talking about to be conscientized, to be aware, and most of these of the predecessors of that particular thinking were like in South Africa, you have got Steve Biko on Black consciousness. So what I'm trying to say is just simple, is to say education becomes a vehicle. But one of the things that I found proud to be part of the Ideological Institute, and I think one of the biggest contribution of the Ideological Institute up to this day, if you go to our WhatsApp group, you realize that there's a lot of work on conscientization on that land, whereby Blacks are being given awareness. Us as Africans are being given awareness about our history, about how we've been subjugated, and they try also to express the pain of us being defined in a way that so that we can fit in a particular framework. So that is one of the biggest contribution that we have had. Yes. So this is only the theoretical part of trying to look at education and trying to define education in the present era. That education is no longer a process of learning. It's a process of de-learning. It's a process of unlearning. Okay. Yes. I want to stop here because my time.
I want to ask you a question before you stop, please.
No problem. Yes. It's okay. You can come.
Our thinking today is to check on the liberation of those key areas. And we've chosen to discuss the liberation of actually education, economics, and health. When you look at Africa liberation today, we want to look at Africa liberation based on the key issues that affect Africans and ask ourselves one question. Are we really liberated? especially in those key areas? And if not, what should be done for us to be liberated? I've done a bit research, a brief one, to compare the indigenous education system vis-a-vis the current education system to check on some disparities and differences. And it's very clear from where I sit that Africa is not liberated. I know many people are thinking that we should leave away liberation to move to Africa Day. And beyond Africa, are the Black people across the world liberated? And the key question will be, in terms of education, do you think we've made a step towards liberating Africa in education sector? And do you think, or can you say that Africa education is, or Black people education is purely liberated? And if not, what should we be doing?
That is a very good question. Actually, to be honest with you, when you started to be in the same, as part of the Ideological Institute, we tried to think about that question. Actually, one of the things that we spent doing was to rethink the Ideological Institute, Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. And we said to ourselves, what is it that we can do? Then we sit down and start reflecting on different modes of education, what can be done and stuff. Of course, our success is when we didn't succeed in doing that. But one of the things that we were doing, like, for example, I'll give an example from where I come from. I remember that I was teaching, at the time I was the third year PhD, and I was teaching in South Africa here. There was what we called FISMAS 4. Then we realized that what we were teaching students, we're teaching them about power, about liberation. We're using all these theories, maybe American theories about power. Then we realized that actually what I was teaching the student had nothing to do with their everyday struggle when they went out for FISMAS 4 and they fight for their own freedom. So what I did was I decided that I wanted to change my course. Because remember that the most important literature is not being taught within our formal universities. Like, for example, people like Fres Fanon, who are very pivotal, the works of Kwame Nkrumah, you don't find them in any of our universities. If you go to our departments of political science, you don't find that. So what we did is, what I thought at that time was, I started using Paulo Ferreira, I still remember, and I also used extensively Fanon during that time, I still remember. And students started actually to connect because these writings had something to do with their own struggle. So when I went back to the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute, because that's where we normally wanted to do it, put it into practical, we sit down and we said, we want to formulate, and part of our institute should be practical, should be able to challenge the educational system, especially the formal education. How do we do it? So we did a program and all these things that we had. But the problem is, one of the biggest problems that we had was we cannot challenge the government enough. We cannot challenge educational institutions enough. Why? It's simply because, remember that the Ideological Institute that we have now is not a government arm, does not have resources. We are more like an NGO that stands on its own. And we're an NGO without even money. So every program that we designed, I remember we tried to say, how do we act on it? It couldn't work. First was because we didn't have enough resources even to go there, because the idea was to say, to challenge universities. We even made up a list to say we want to target universities that claim to be Pan-African, so that we start with them. Then we can share this material to them and force them to put them within their curriculum. But as you have said, brother, we are no way. When it comes to formal education, there's nothing. Everything that is there is the same system that was there. So my argument was to say, if you want to transform, we need to go into the formal education. Even those who are studying medicine, there should be a subject called the politics of medicine, so that their duty is not just to be taught to go and go to the patients and stuff. They should first think, why am I being a doctor? And what type of circumstances am I working in? Is this way I'm working as a doctor for liberation or for what? So what I was thinking was to say, even those hard sciences like chemistry, genetics, there should be a politics of genetics, a politics of physics, whereby we start thinking about, why are we even doing this physics? How does Africa benefit within that? So that every faculty within any university has to have a politics of whatever they are doing, so that at least we'll be able to trust. That was one of the ways that we think. But I tell you, as we stand now, even us as Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute, we tried to do that. And remember that we don't have resources, we don't have money. And some of us were trying to survive in our institutions. So we couldn't dedicate our time towards trying to really challenge these universities. You need resources, you need to be there. You need all these things. So most of us, we're now struggling, looking for our jobs, trying to keep our jobs instead of doing this work. And remember that most of the work that we do is Pan-Africanist. We don't do it because we get money. It's out of passion. But sometimes passion is not enough. You need support. When Kwame Nkrumah was able to do all these things because he would mobilize state resources. But us, what do we have? We don't even have money to start. So we need also to have us, a civil society organization, I'm talking about out of the universities, to be given also enough resources to be able to challenge. If you realize that Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute have also challenged in different levels, we have tried to write letters, but our voices have always been very small because we don't have the resource space to do that. And none of us can leave our jobs and completely dedicate them ourselves to this program that we want to do. So to be honest with you, we have tried to do that. I also tried to do it within an educational sector, because I taught at University of Johannesburg, I taught at University of Mandela. I also taught in UKZN, University of KwaZulu-Natal, where I was trained. But also remember that the structure of the universities, they give you a only limited space to maneuver. If you go beyond, you might actually be kicked out of work. So what I was thinking maybe in the future is for us who wants to do this out of passion, to try to mobilize resources that will support us to be able to challenge without any limitations of an institution that pays us. Once we are able to live on the baseline, we'll be able also to fight it through. So Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute have tried, and I was actually was leading the educational sector of that particular thing. We didn't do well. It was not successful, but we tried. That you can see that Africa is not free. But we cannot give up because it's not free. And we cannot still give up because we do not have resources. We cannot. We have to do something.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Kwame. Permit me to share just a brief thing I got in regards to comparison of traditional education or the indigenous education vis-a-vis the current education system. Then I can allow Brother Kwame and then can direct to allow other members to come in and give their contribution a bit. So,
but Pigeon, I was wondering whether brother Dr. Piri's presentation, whether it is not more distinct from what you're about to share. It's just me asking. Or do you think it builds into what he has been saying? In which case, it would be good for us to listen to your presentation,
yeah,
and then the meeting will ask questions. What do you think?
Yeah, mine is briefly to give exactly differences in terms of both methodology and everything else in regards to the current or Western education system versus the indigenous education system. So that when we discuss towards the liberation, then we agree either come into a solution. How do you achieve or retain back the indigenous? Because when you talk of liberation, it doesn't mean that we never had a system. There was a system.
Thank you. In that case, before you present, can I ask Dr. Piri, can you summarize for us the kernel of your argument? And then Brother Pigeon will continue from there. Thank you.
My argument is, it's sad and it's unfortunate that we stand today, after about 70 years, we're still talking about the same thing, about freedom from education. Want to change our own education system. That's what I was trying to look at, to say that we are still in the same predicament that we were 70 years ago. Kwame Nkrumah was saying exactly what we are saying today. We are studying the same thing that Kwame Nkrumah have said long back. The question, what can we do? Even from what we can do, we still fail because we are still under-resourced, because the same regime that oppressed us during colonial days is still doing the same thing up to this day. So the question that I ask is, then what is that we can do? According to me, I just finish on the note of saying that it's very difficult to maneuver in such an environment. But the fact that it's difficult does not make us to give up. Thank you. I think.
Excellent. So with that clear, succinct, pallid summary, Brother Pigeon, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Brother Kwame. Actually, I'll still come to agree with what you said, but just looking a bit on the education systems, look at the comparison in terms of the indigenous education system or the African education system by that time and the current one. And I looked at some key scopes that I wanted to check on. First was the goal and the purpose. The African or indigenous education system goal was more of centrality of community. Our indigenous education was deeply rooted in the community. It aimed to prepare individuals to contribute for their immediate environment and uphold communal values. It was also holistic development. It focused on developing practical skills, social responsibility, cultural identity, and spiritual awareness. And lastly, it was more of an oral tradition. Knowledge was transmitted from generation to generation through either storytelling. But if you check the current education system, its goal is more of global competitiveness. That's why you want to be the best person to get more job or the best job to be best educated. So it brings in competition. Modern education aims to prepare students for globalized world, emphasizing academic knowledge, skills, and career readiness. So it's a competition. It brings in, or it actually gets people who compete for some spaces. There's also focusing on individual success. It's unlike the tradition which was communal. Here's individual success. Once you're educated, it's you alone who can get the best salary and you alone who can survive the good life you want. It's not actually back to the community or for the benefit of the community. Maybe sometimes it does. Also, it's more of formal curriculum. So it's structured within the subjects, as we know, all these aspects. But if you look also in terms of the content that and methods that were being used for teaching, for indigenous education system, it was more of practical knowledge. So indigenous education emphasized on practical skills, such as farming, craftsmanship, healing, and communal cooperation. It also actually based too much on cultural heritage. It preserved our cultural practices, our history, and our traditional wisdom. And learning was by doing. Children learn through hand-on experience and observations and participation. But if you check the current system, it's more of formal subjects, which basically goes to cover a range of subjects around about textbooks and technology. That's what it relies on. And basically, it's more of classroom-based. It's all things that are done in a formal setup, which was unlike our education system. It was not a must be in a class, either a room or something like that. We could do it under the tree or anywhere else or by the elders in the evening and the rest. And then if you go a bit to check on the teacher-student relationship, realize in our traditional or indigenous education system, it was the elders who were actually teaching the younger generation. So there was that aspiration of the elders and the community members. Elders and skilled community members served as teachers and mentors. They also a lot of respect and reverence. Students respected their teachers and learned from their life experience. But today, you see, the students actually dictate the teacher. They tell you what you should do. They have their base of so many rights they claim of today. So if you check out today or the current education system currently, you find that the relationship between the teacher and students is more of professional. It's not more of like that respectful, but professional. Certified teachers deliver their own content. There's also formal authority, teacher hold authority, and students follow prescribed curriculum, you see. But if you check language of instruction also, our education system actually embraced our language in terms of a methodology or a tool for education or teaching and communication. And it was also embedded on our culture. Language was actually inseparable from our cultural context. But currently, you see the language is different. It's official language they use, which is away more from our traditional system or traditional language. And there's also language instruction following standardized rules. On assessment, you'll check that our indigenous education system actually had an informal assessment. So learning process was assessed through observation, practical tasks, and community recognition. There were no standard like this current formal exams and standardized class assessment or assessment. But today, it's a more of a standardized thing. It's a formal assessment. There are measures to show students' performance. So he who gets the less grades are either categorized as being foolish or whatever. So there's that ranking of who is the best and who is not the best. Lastly, I'll check on the spiritual connection. In our African indigenous education system, there was harmony with the nature. Indigenous education emphasized harmony with the nature and spiritual interconnectedness. Those ritual and ceremonies, spiritual practices were also integrated into daily life and education, where currently is a secular focus, separation from either religion or spirituality. It's also scientifically rationality, emphasis on empirical evidence and critical thinking. So basically, those are the few differences in terms of our traditional and the current education system. Back to you, Brother Kwame.
Thank you. Dr. Piri, your initial comments.
No, I could not agree anymore. You see, if you were to follow what we did, I was with Dr. Ben during that time. when we were trying to make a transition of the ideological institute, actually, we sit down and realize that actually what was central to the education, what we were saying, just a summary, you're trying to say our African education was meant about building, human building, Ubuntu. It was not about competition, it was about building each other and helping each other. When one falls, we don't run to be number one. I stop and carry you and run with you. That's how the education was. But the system that we have now, it's a system that teaches us to be number one. Even the grading system, like you've said, it's quite, I'll give you an example. When I went to, I was teaching in Benin. So when I was teaching there, I told them that I don't give tests. And I told them that I don't give tests. And I said that I will make students to reflect on the work that they do. They told me straight away that if you want to teach in our university, you have to follow the criteria that is there that makes students, you know, that the process of learning, like us who have been in the teaching field, you realize that you need to be patient with students that you teach. You need to make sure that they also, it's not that you force them to believe that what they're doing is good for them. They should realize that actually the knowledge that they get is actually good for them. But the system that we have now, it's quite cutthroat. So it's quite dry, and it also makes students, even other qualities of students, not to be seen because of the way it is. So if you go back to the indigenous and you go back to mood, actually the basis and fundamental motivators of every education is African philosophy, that's what I want to, which is Ubuntu. Once you go back to that, we start realizing education is not about going ahead. It's about creating a better society, whereby even the weak, they find consolation in the strength of the strong. Thank you. Yes.
Very, very, very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Perry. It's wonderful to have you with us. Just to remind us all, we are celebrating African Liberation Day. We have been hearing from some of our powerful minds, Dr. Perry, Brother Pigeon, all sharing with us their research findings and their experiences of education. We've heard from them, and let's now move to general discussion. So we have Brother Joseph's hand is up. Brother Joseph, let's start with you, and then from you we go to Sister Ida, and then in that order. So Brother Joseph, is it a question or is it a comment?
Well, question
it's
and
okay,
comment.
it doesn't matter. You carry on. Whether it's a question or a comment, it's fine. Carry on.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I mean, I'm so happy or so pleased at the contribution you have made, and also the addition that Pigman have also contributed, because I was thinking exactly those thoughts. Like, for instance, Paulo Freire's work, and that have influenced me enormously, and also Fan Fanon. In fact, I'm so amazed at the comeback of Fanon on the African continent in terms of the waves he's making, particularly in South Africa. So I begin to believe that maybe the brother is probably one of those that are helping the revival of Fanon. In terms of the way, the difference between what we know as education now and what happened, as the speakers have said, the education has been holistic, has been rounded. For instance, there is a famous statement that it takes a village to bring up a child. If you understand, if you want to conceptualize the problem we face in communities today, we realize that because the families are individualistic and they are made to compete. Let me say this. A few years ago, I went to give a speech, well, a talk at the beginning of a school day week in one of the secondary schools in Grenada. And I asked a provocative question to the students, the assembly. Why are you coming to school? And Loma put their hands up, sir, to get a job. And I said, it's very sad that you come into school to get a job, because this shouldn't be the first concern. The first concern should be to be a better citizen or better contributor to the society. But unfortunately, the ethos of competition in the school. So these are the brother talk about, I think one of the things also that fascinates me about African intellectual and I mean intelligence is that the proverbs. There's not a shortage of proverbs that inspire people across the world from Africa. There's so much. And when you come to the stories again, the myths, the mythology and so on, is fabulous. And then the rituals, the role of ritual in consolidating what people have learned is another thing. And we don't pay attention to those things, but these are very, very important, which we don't believe, we are made to despise ritual and nowadays. We had the famous one, I think in Mali, where every 50th year you have this thing, the reliving of something. I don't know the detail. I think the historian from Senegal, Diop, highlighted that a lot. But I know I cannot spend the rest of the evening, but the other thing that was done, inspiration. I mean, hardly anybody been inspired these days. I'm told that Marcus Garvey, Musayo Garvey, influenced a whole set of people, whether it's Ho Chi Minh, even Kwame Nkrumah. I mean, there was people who was able to inspire others to go and do work in their in their part of the world. So I just thought that I'll add that, and there are many more. But I'm very elated by the presentation. And don't forget here,
Thank you,
two
brother.
things before I go. The role of the media in educating us subtly, subliminally these days, particularly advertising and things, telling you what to do, which also undermine your sense of person. These we have to look at it, and also religion. Religion, and I heard a conversation this morning where a man was despising African liberation. He said that they want to bring us to the devil and them kind of thing on our radio. Just imagine that this time in history, people don't understand the value of African liberation. Because of the brainwashing and the propaganda that is 24/7 in our part of the world. Thanks.
No, thank you, Brother Joseph, for your very immense contributions there. So before we continue, Brother Pigeon, can you, just for all our benefit of all of us, can you summarize again the kernel of your research finding on education?
So basically, there are a few recommendations that come in after the end of this finding. That one is actually need for us to bridge the gap between indigenous knowledge and modern education, then can enrich us as a people. Of course, we can take advantage a bit of the new technology here, but even in technology, we should not forget about the foundations and the principles of our education. Why were we being educated? And that's very important here, because we realize that also you see the mode of language that we've mentioned here. The language of instruction also takes away a lot of our culture. So we get educated for actually and then forgetting about our culture. So there's also need for that. And finally, I'll summarize by saying that we need an education that should empower us in order to liberate ourselves. The same way Kwame Nkrumah seek education for the purpose of liberation. I don't believe or think that the current education system, the Western education system, can actually prepare an African, progressive Pan-African, to liberate himself or herself. And therefore, there's a need for us to look back into our indigenous education system and use it in order to get us and prepare people who can be conscious of their history in order to fight to liberate us as a people, because this system might not liberate us. Thank you.
It's interesting you say that, Brother Pigeon, that first of all, thank you for the summary. It's interesting you say that is or can the current education system equip us to liberate ourselves? And then one raises the question, well, how did Nkrumah, how did Nyerere, how did all our freedom fighters, and even Frantz Fanon, I mean, these were all educated by the Western system, and yet they turn around to liberate, to fight for our liberation. Well, you can say, well, they are only a few, the majority don't. So it's interesting you raise that. We have with us our own brother, Prince Salifu, who is the executive director of the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. And as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Piri is in a way, also presenting to us on behalf of the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. And as you listen to you realize that he kept referring to the institute again and again and again. Brother Prince, if you want to say a few words, please. Please, if you want to say a few words to us, please do so. Unmute yourself and do so. That's if you want to. Thank you. Right. Maybe Brother Prince is not ready. So let's carry on. The time is now 7 minutes to 8. We might have to go on to the health presentation because we are doing 3 presentations today. So we might have to move to health, but we have some hands up. We have 2 ladies hand up, so we need to take the hands of our ladies. You know, our sisters are key. They are part of the army for the liberation of Africa and its unification development, and we have to listen to them at all times. Sister Ida.
Thank you very much, Brother Stephen, for your talk. And along the way, in listening to it, I realized that the people that we often recognize them because they've written something and the writing stays, and people can pick it up at any time along the way. Even the publishing of the Bible, I think it was Luther in Germany, who was a printer, who started publishing the Bible. Then people like Marcus Garvey, it's because he was a publisher, he was a printer publisher, and a lot of his works are published, or a lot of what he had to say is published as well. Then I remembered Bernard Cord, and his how the West how the black child was educationally subnormal. Even years later, that book is still recognized and is still talked about. In Nkrumah, we're doing this because of his book and because he's been published and we read. So I loved what you had to say, and I thought that maybe out of these 2 days, we could maybe put in writing and publish what we've done for liberation, African Liberation Day. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
No, excellent thoughts. Sister Ida is suggesting that we put together our discussions here, and I think Dr. Piri will welcome that because he's also the lead person for starting where the conversation did take place about starting some kind of journal for KNII. So it's something we will welcome. Ida, thank you very much. Sister Tapua. So after Sister Tapua, we'll go on to health. So the brother who is presenting on health, please get ready to come in after Sister Tapua. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My contribution is going to be based on experience. I'm a teacher by profession.
Sorry, what do you teach?
I was teaching I was teaching English in the UK. I was teaching African history in Zimbabwe. I was lecturing in a teacher's training college on pedagogy of teaching English. So I'm also a psychologist of sorts. Anyway, I'm coming in because I'm thinking it's great that we've started with education, but we cannot look at education, the liberation of education, in isolation, because education has a purpose and it usually links in with who is in charge of the economic side of things. So what we have from my experience is, having taught in a country with colonial experience, everything was attuned to meeting the needs of the colonial system. And then when I went to the United Kingdom, I experienced a contrast, because whilst in Zimbabwe, we were all very competitive in terms of who gets the greatest marks, who's going to be doing which job. And so it was almost a sifting method that was used. to see how well you'd fit into the system, into matching the colonial master and his requirements. But when I went to the UK, they are totally discouraging competition. And they're doing it for different reasons. Because we couldn't even get kids to take part competitively in athletics or give marks in class competitively. Because what's happening is out there in the center of the empire, as it were, they don't want their subjects to know the history of how they got to be where they are. So you find that they make sure that kids don't feel the competition. They make sure that if you're being the anti-racism that they're talking about is so that you don't rattle the boat. Because if you do, then there are problems for them. So in either situation, it's suppression of the workers, the working class. So we have a different kind of problem to deal with. And the people who are in charge of wealth creation and so on are doing what they're doing to us in Africa to the other people on the other side who, although they might be the same skin color, they'll cause problems and rock the boat. So I think we're going to have a clearer picture once we talk about economics and how our education system should fit what we think
So
our liberated Africa should look like.
Thank you. So were you planning to do a presentation on economics then, Sister Tapua?
No. I'm going to be listening to everyone else.
Since you think education is so central to economics is central to education, I would have thought you will lead that discussion for us. Anyway, thank you.
Anyway, I'll make a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. It's 8 o'clock. Let's move to health, please.
Dr. Maha.
Yes,
Dr. Maha, I hope is able to speak. I know he's in a hospital, maybe committed, but
good evening, members.
Oh, good evening, Dr. Maha.
Are you getting me well? Good evening, members.
Yes, Dr. Maha, where are you joining us from?
From Nairobi, Kenya.
Wonderful. Yeah, please share with us your thoughts on health on this Africa Liberation Day. Thank you.
Okay. I will we'll discuss, we'll have a brief overview of the current systems of health and of the current status of health and health systems in Africa, the degree to which they have achieved liberation, independence, and also the challenges and the solutions and strategies on the way forward. I'll begin by a basic definition of health, which is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of diseases or infirmity. The enjoyment to the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being, without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic or social conditioning. When we talk about a health system, we basically talking about a structure that includes all actors, organizations, institutions, and resources whose primary purpose is to improve health. Their primary goal is to promote, to restore, to restore, and to maintain health. But they also aim to be responsive to people's legitimate expectations. So I'll break it down into about 5 points, and I'll begin by asking a few questions, like how have the health systems in Africa following the colonial rule performed over the decades? Here we find that of the 54 African countries that pledged to increase the health budget from 15%, that had promised to increase the health budget to 15%, only 7 have achieved the goal, but to do that, the majority of them had to rely heavily on international donors, and some had actually to reduce their budgets, and that forced a number of their citizens to pay half of their health services out of their pockets. Even though Africa accounts for about 11 to 13% of the world population, its disease burden is 24%, and sub-Saharan Africa commands less than the 1% of the global expenses. So basically, non-conducive health policies non-conducive health sector policy, environment, underfunding, shortages of human resources for health, unavailability of medicines, vaccines, and inadequate service coverage are some of the factors that have really hampered healthcare access to Africa. So the second part is about what are the inequalities in health in Africa as per the moment. We find that sub-Saharan Africa bears the brand of global health inequalities with high levels of undernutrition, whereby 50% of maternal and child death, and a high burden of infectious diseases that is including HIV and AIDS, malaria, and even tuberculosis. We find sub-Saharan Africa trailing behind all other continents in an attempt to meet its Millennium Development Goals in health. Thirdly, what are the factors that impact on healthcare in Africa? Here we have social factors, we have environmental factors, we have economic, and to a minor extent, even genetic factors that have been seen to be contributing to differences in health status and therefore present an opportunity for us to intervene. The fourth part is what are the problems the health sector in African countries face? One, we have inadequate human resources, especially in our healthcare setups. Two, we have poor resource allocation to the health sector. Three, we have poor maintenance of healthcare system infrastructure. Fourth, we have lack of political will and political interference by the leadership of the day in most African countries. Fifth, we have mass migration of healthcare workers to Western countries in search of greener pastures. A good example is Nigeria, and also Kenya has a similar issue. The sixth part is about high cost of drugs and medications, and also medical equipment, since most of them are imported as most of them are imported because rarely do they manufacture them in African setups. The fifth part are what are the biggest infectious killers in Africa? With malnutrition as a common contributor, the 5 biggest infectious killers in Africa are acute respiratory infections, HIV/AIDS, diarrhea, malaria, tuberculosis, that account probably to an average of about 80% of the disease burden and claim about 6 million people per year. So in a nutshell, healthcare system in Africa pay little attention to the critical interface between education and good health, especially when it comes to the education of women and mothers, who are the primary line of defense against child diseases and perform most of the domestic chores and also critical aspects of agriculture. While many educational institutions on the continent tend to perpetuate at times skewed and irrelevant Eurocentric health training, the national pyramidal health structure weakened at the village level and disproportionately favoring the provincial and national hospitals. That gives an illusion that rural areas are well served, when in actuality, that is not the case. So basically, we should strengthen the uncompromised healthcare systems to make it effective and efficient for both rural and urban areas. That one can be done by finding ways of trimming financial and human resource wastage, revamping of our institutions and training the healthcare service providers to make responsive to make the system responsive to healthcare needs of the people and not just the majority few. Also, we have to compensate or pay our medical personnel better compared to our civil servants and parliamentarians. We also have to align our educational systems with targeted and expected measurable health outcomes. However, when all that is said and done, primary healthcare, which is still the backbone of the health industry, remains the best answer to diseases as it provides the basic preventive strategies that render the system cheap and also reducing in the process the rate of child and maternal morbidity rates. Millennium Development Goals, which are virtually all countries around the world and organizations pledged to reach by the year 2015, majority of them haven't been achieved. Majorly the child mortality, maternal health, and diseases prevention haven't been achieved in most African countries. So basically, a functioning health system must have the necessary ingredients that hinge on multiple of financial, social, economic, environmental, and workforce resources, and also a leadership that is committed with a vision that focuses primarily on the people, particularly the poor, the sick, the disabled, and that one can be done through various initiatives that can encourage change in individual unhealthy behaviors. So basically, health systems in Africa are determined or affected by a number of factors, especially external players. Such examples include WHO, World Bank, USAID, IMF, and many other organizations, including Bill and Melinda Gates. They tend to have much control and much say in how we run our healthcare systems, which to some extent might not be at the best interest of Africans at heart. So basically, a functioning health system should have a more balanced horizontal approach to the diseases. It should focus on prevention, focus on education, awareness of the mode of transmission, and focus both on infectious and chronic diseases in an integrated approach towards healthcare. And also, it should involve whole sectors of our government, such as the ministries of health, education, transportation, infrastructure, law enforcement, water and sanitation. We have food and security, housing, sharing of information well, stressing on the general health goals, and other appropriate strategies that might be needed. So, back on solutions, other important elements to focus on include providing primary health care rather than on acute diseases. A good example is a case of Ethiopia that successfully managed to reach about 80% of its population. Okay. So basically, on this is just a point of addition or a note to. We believe that scientific work done in Africa should be rapidly and freely made available to all researchers worldwide. We should aim to create, simulate, and perpetuate a culture of information sharing and publishing amongst our researchers and other health actors of the African health scene in ways that will contribute to availability of information, better understanding of African specificities, and overall to improve health outcomes of the people on the continent. And this is just an additive looking broadly about sub-Saharan Africa. We find East Africa that has been we find East Africa having a few challenges here and there, majorly on infectious diseases. The major challenge is malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, and maternal issues. That's the major challenge with the East African side. In West Africa, we have a case of Ebola viruses, the Lassa fevers, that have created a lot of challenges for our people in West Africa. In South Africa, we have a number of issues, basically the HIV pandemic. And I'm about to end it, but I will touch on the issue of I touch on a health system issue, basically from an African context. Previously, we find that African systems are ungovernable most of the time, basically partly due to the powerful international donors who work at cross purposes, setting and competing agendas, cycling policies at a rate that defies bureaucratic assimilation, fragmenting health efforts, and undermining local systems of accountability. This is a recognition that accountability, transparent, and vigorous citizenship participation are essential to achieving a viable society, sustainable economic growth, and equitable distribution of benefits of risk growth. I will end there, and whoever has an additive to add or push questions ahead. Thank you.
Dr. Maha, thank you very much. What a comprehensive attention and delivery and presentation on the health system in Africa. We thank you. We thank you for your presentation. Now, Brother Pigeon, I believe you had an additional short research on health. Is that correct?
Yes, it's true.
Excellent. Before you share with us, Dr. Maha, just in a nutshell, can you summarize for us what your presentation is to us today while celebrating ALD? What is the message? Summarize that for us, please. Thank you. And then Brother PG will come in.
Kindly repeat again. Haven't gotten you well. Hello?
Yeah, I was asking.
Yes.
Could you summarize your presentation for us, please, as we celebrate Africa Liberation Day? In a nutshell, what is your message to us today and to Africa?
Basically, health systems haven't fared on well. We still miles back. We need to work on our health systems. We need to cut down on over-reliance on donors, especially World Health Organization, IMF, and World Bank and the likes. Because as long as we're relying heavily on the donors, they will give us restrictions and restrict our movement ahead in the healthcare sector. But basically, we're trying, but we need to work harder, share information, share resources, and try to build the medical industry. Produce drugs at home to cut down on expenses. The political leadership should also step in hand and support the healthcare industry. We should also cut down on corruption and majorly work on dealing with the primary healthcare. It's much cheaper preventing diseases than waiting to deal with them at an acute stage. Thank you.
Excellent. And Dr. Maha, by primary healthcare, you mean?
Yes, sir.
What is primary healthcare?
Primary healthcare. primary healthcare preventive measures. We find an example of a case of malaria, which is prevalent. We should use mosquito nets, spray the mosquitoes. Basically, that way we're in a position to prevent infections at the initial stages, rather than waiting until we land at a hospital.
Thank you very much.
Hello?
Thank you very much, Dr. Maha, for your presentation. Now, Brother Pigeon, can you come in there and share your research briefly so that we can open the floor?
Thank you.
I hope we've all noticed that brother Dr. Maha has, in effect, introduced the economics already for us. He's referred to the role of the Bretton Woods institutions, their control over our health system and directing our health system. So he has in a way shown us in terms of the economics what we should be discussing. Thank you. Yes, Brother Pigeon.
Yeah, basically what Dr. Mars also qualify in this African Liberation Day is that our health system is not yet liberated. So this is very clear because we over-rely on support, data system and everything else still on the West. So basically Africa health system is not yet liberated. So from my side, I'll be doing what we call a comparative analysis on aspects of the current health system and the traditional health system or indigenous health system. If you look at the current health system, which is the Western health system, their philosophy and approach is on biomedical models. They're based, of course, on scientific evidence. And you realize that Africa lacks data or ability to collect this scientific evidence, especially data now. The storage of data and everything else is an issue. They also rely on diagnosis, treatment using pharmaceutical surgery and the rest. And they're also still individual focused. So they treat diseases at the individual level. The etymology actually is on emphasis on biological factors. But take a look at African approach in terms of philosophy, in terms of health. Africa looked at health holistically, which was considering both your physical, your mental, your social or spiritual aspect. To them, they view all that as aspect of your health. But if you look at the current system, it's based on evidence on diagnosis, and it's based on purely symptoms that can be prevailed. But Africa went beyond this. Africa also approached health system from a community-based centered, which is embedded in our cultural practices and our community life. Our etymology was blended on natural, supernatural, and social factors. But the etymology of the current system is based on biological factors. If you go a bit on our health providers, of course, the current health system, the providers are, of course, trained medical school doctors or those people who have guidance. They're either technicians or the nurses and the so-called people. But in Africa system, they were indigenous healers. Their knowledge were passed down through generations, so they could not base their knowledge on a book, but through generations of the ancestors who were healing. So then that was passed down to them. And they also had traditional birth attendants who could help during the birth of a child. There's also issue of infrastructure. If you check the current system, all these are done in either an equipped hospital, clinic, and whatever. But back at home in our traditional system, was there a clinic equipped or whatever? There wasn't something like that. And the research currently and innovation is actually currently or constantly evolving. Look at the African setup. It was healing often occurred naturally in any natural environment, either in a forest or by the riverside, anywhere we could do it. There was no must to have a thermometer or whatever back there. We could do it on a natural field. And this was actually passed through oral traditions, storytellings, and rituals that could also help or act as preventive measures. Look at the language of infrastructure. This is more of formal language of instruction. For example, for a current doctor in a village, to translate the name of a pharmaceutical disease or drug into mother tongue or traditional language might be very hard. And therefore, to somebody who does not understand the language, how easily the person adapt to that? But if you look at our traditional system, our instructions in our medical system were done through our indigenous knowledge transmitted in our local languages. So it was very easy to explain to somebody what they're suffering from. But today, it might be hard if the person is not literate enough in terms of their so-called current education system. Assessment in the current system rely on laboratory tests, imaging or clinical examinations. And also, it is evidence-based medicine. But look at our assessment in our indigenous system. It was intonation and observation. Healers rely on intonations and observations and patient narratives. So you can see, you observe, realize there's something wrong somewhere, or you give them the story and they know what's wrong. And they were healing you. Their healing involved herbs, rituals, spiritual practices, materials based on their research. But the current challenge now in the current system is that the current health system is very expensive. So access caused what we call disparity in terms of cost. Look, during COVID, some people could not afford the so-called current system of education or medicine, either the hospitals or whatever, ended up dying if they were relying on that. There's also fragmentation and specialized care can lead to fragmented services. But look, some people like what Magufuli came up with, that if you take some, I don't know, some melon or whatever, traditional what, you drink them, you're okay. So everybody could easily access such traditional medicine. But how many people could afford maybe what they were calling oxygen gas and whatever? So those brought a serious issue. And that's why they found strength in our traditional health system, which include it aligns with our community-based beliefs and practices, and it's often accessible and affordable to all in terms of economics here. And it's also emphasis on our community and family support. So that's a brief comparative analysis. Back to you, Brother Kwame.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, Dr. Maha, it appears that the system that you talked to us about, if I heard Brother Pigeon correctly, is the Western system, and that is the problem. If only we went to our traditional systems, all will be well, and everybody will be happy. What is your view?
You're right on that, because before the white man came, before we adopted the current medical practices, our people used to treat or heal ailments in the past. It doesn't mean that healing or medical issues came only by the white man. The ancient systems still work to some extent, is a replica of what we call Ayurveda medicine, that is the Indian or the Asian version. Yes, our systems work, but I think the main challenge is we can have a blend of modernity and our African systems. Major challenge is the translation. It's difficult to translate from English to your mother tongue or to an African language for somebody to understand exactly what you're talking about at a village level. That is also an issue. But blending both modern medicine and traditional can still work. In Kenya, they're trying to bring it up, but it still faces an uphill challenge from the big pharma and the rest. But still they work.
Yeah, okay. Now, thank you very much for your response, that perhaps we need to blend the two. Okay, the time is 8:26, and we haven't heard on the economics. I think we've heard comprehensively on health, so I would suggest we move on to economics. So, Brother Pigeon, who is presenting on economics?
Brother Hegel Mwash was supposed to be here to present on economics, but I'll also give just a comparative analysis that can then steer the conversation. It's not possible.
So that means you're going to present on economics, is that correct?
Yeah, I'll just do what I do before, comparative analysis briefly.
Okay, hold on. Before you do that, let me invite Brother Prince again, the director of the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute, to share with us a few words of solidarity, if he's able to speak. Brother Prince.
Yes, Comrade Kwame.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry, just now when you called me, I was not around.
Well, it's good you're around now. Some words of solidarity from you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, fellow comrades. It's my pleasure to listen in to this event. It's unfortunate that we don't have many people here, despite the fact that it is a good time for people to have come to learn some knowledge and exchange with other Africans and see, try to have solutions to our problems instead of lamenting all the time. But notwithstanding, from what I've heard here, especially on the education part from Dr. Fury, that is good, because I think that if our mindset via education is empowered, any other thing will fall in place. Like Dr. Maher just spoke about health. Yeah, it's true. It's not like translation is the problem. It's just the promotion. We know that our states are captured by the imperialists, so it is difficult to promote anything that they don't want. Because how can you say about the Chinese and the Indians? What are they doing? How are they doing it? Chinese medicine is very strong. You have big hospitals in China that are administering just Chinese medicine. What is Chinese medicine? It's just the same thing that we have. And Chinese are opening shops in many African countries and are administering their Chinese medicine. Whereas we look at our own African medicine and say that it is not good or it is some kind of thing. We have to change our mindset and know that we have been treated by this traditional medicine, despite the fact that the colonialists gave us a different name about this medicine. But I think there's some improvement. For the case of Cameroon, the traditional healers, as they are known, they have an association of which many of them are practicing freely. The only problem is about standardization, which has to come from the government part. But the government decide to leave it in a way that they can always come in and round them up. They say that they're either breaking laws or whatever. But I think that if it is standardized, then we can say that Cameroon is in a line of reviving the traditional African medicine. So I want to thank take this opportunity to thank the organizers and to say continue with this great work. But I think that if we keep working separately, it's not going to help the liberation of Africa. We have to try to work collaboratively. We have to work with other organizations, because if this event was promoted by other organizations, I think we definitely have more people and the effect on the ground will be higher. So let's try to think about working together. If you have an event, invite fellow Pan-African organizations to see how we can work together, because this is the thing that we have been lacking and is delaying the liberation of Africa. In addition, I would say we have not been liberated, although we are celebrating the Liberation Day, but we can, I can say we should celebrate, because we are a race that have been hit hard, but we have shown that we can survive, and we are surviving, so we should celebrate, but still working hard to move us to the next level. Accept fraternal greetings from Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Executive Director of the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. Thank you very much for your message of solidarity and your comments on the health and education presentations. Thank you. Please extend our fraternal greetings to Kina Aya also on our behalf. We hear you, and yes, for the coming Saturday, we shall continue to circulate the poster and invite as many people as can make it on Saturday. So thank you very much. So brothers and sisters, you have just heard from our own brother, brother Prince. We thank him so much, because where he is now, it's past midnight, I think, where he is. So to be joining us at that time of perhaps even the morning, around 3 a.m., that kind of time, is really a sign of his dedication to the cause. So we thank him. I just for those of you, your hands up, just so you know, I do know you have your hands up. I will come to you. But Dr. Piri, are you there? Dr. Piri?
Yes, I'm here.
Please, can you make a short comment on the health part that you just heard? Give us your view on that. Yeah, your view on that, please.
Yes, so I only had the first part, and I moved out of the house, but I heard what I just said something. But you see, it's one of the things that is very disappointing about Africa is, if you realize the talk that you gave on education and you correct it on the health, you can see the continuation of the predicament of Africa. That's it's like, for example, every year when we celebrate Africa Day, we are reflecting on our predicament. We are reflecting on our problems, and the problems that we didn't cause ourselves. Of course, maybe sometimes some people might say that our leaders have failed us. That is true. But also the system itself that we work within is still continuing, giving us the same problems that we had before. So it's like it's now colonialism in a different shape, whether it's in education, whether it's in health, and we'll even hear the next presenter, the same thing will just continue, which is very sad. I just want to stop here.
Yeah, thank you very much for your observation. Let's go to economics, and then we'll open the floor later for those who want to make comments. So, Brother Pigeon,
Okay.
Sister Tapua, you wanted also to present on economics, so get ready to come in after Brother Pigeon.
Good, thank you, Brother. Is also a pleasure that Brother Coco is an economist is also here.
Sorry, who?
Brother Coco.
Oh, okay.
Brother Coco is also an economist here, and you are also an economist here. So basically, what I'll be doing is just, first of all,
He
to
can
give up.
take my spot.
No, Sister Tapua, you'll have to contribute. There's nobody who will take your space. So I'm running briefly on the comparative analysis. That's what I'm trying to do. If you are saying maybe a liberated system, how will it look like? What was our system before and what's the current system? Then that should tell us whether it is liberated or what should be done in order to retain what you want. So in economics, I'll be doing the same comparative analysis. I will be using the same methodology. One, to check on the philosophy and the approach. So what is the philosophy and the approach of Western or the current economic system we are trying to put in place? One is that its philosophy is more of capitalism. The Western economies operate with a capitalist framework, emphasizing private ownership, market-driven production, and profit maximization. It also deals with much of an individual wealth accumulation. That is its philosophy and approach. It prioritizes individual financial success and wealth accumulation. It also looks at market mechanism. It relies on supply and demand, competition, and price signals. But if you look at it, what was our indigenous economic approach in terms of philosophical aspect, ours was based on more of communalism. It was centered around communal well-being rather than individual accumulation. There was aspect of shared resources. There was no individual wealth accumulation in one way. Even though if one could accumulate wealth, but there was an inner aspect of shared resources. So it emphasizes on resource sharing, unlike private ownership. There was collective decision making, and there was also community welfare that was given priority. It was also holistic. It considered social, cultural, and spiritual aspect. So economics or wealth in that aspect was not only viewed on either the material aspect, your social or your cultural or your spiritual aspect could also be considered as an aspect of your wealth. If you check at the economic institutions, the current system, of course, operate with things like banks, stock markets, investment, and central laws. They also have their own laws. They enforce some property rights. They do with some contract and some business regulations. They also deal much with the global network, participation in international trade. But as infrastructurized in African economic system, if you check a bit, it was like in terms of now its infrastructure again, you realize that it's advanced and technology, it deals with manufacturing, it also concentrates on economic activities in the city. But look at Africa's system. It was focused on meeting basic needs rather than profit. So everybody who actually engaged in any economic, either any selling or anything you do, was basically to help you meet your basic need. It was not too much of making money out of it by either selling to people so that you can get more profit out of it. And it also based much on not currency system. It was on a barter exchange. So trade occurs within just local communities. If you could not have money, you could exchange something with another person. There's also self-sufficiency. It relies on self-reliance and sustainability. If you look at current economic system, it also relies on monetary system, the currency. There's something like currency. There's a control of currency through something called central bank, you see? But in our African education system, it was land-based economy. The people know that the land is actually like a primary product that then can result to everything else. So people concentrated on land. Indigenous activities were actually enabled tidily with the land. So everything was on land. Agriculture and livestock, farming, herding and fishing are the essential part of this. The social capital, the community bonds were strong and there was mutual support. There's also elders and community leaders that were guiding economic decisions. So you realize the current economic system is actually having some challenges, what we call income disparities. There's a widening gap between the poor and the rich. There's also issues of environmental impact, concern about the resources depletion and climate change. So that's why they'll be coming over to exploit more and more resources. And that's why you realize there's more and more rich people and more poor people. And that was not the approach we had in African economic system. So basically, those are the few comparative analyses that I wanted to give us a head start. Brother Kwame?
Brother Pigeon, most excellent. I think you have, shall we say, in how you presented it, in fact, your entire framework is interesting. How you presented the economics aspect, one would say that it lends itself nicely to the argument that what we need in Africa is socialism. Precisely because the argument you've made and all the things you've said about the indigenous African economic system, the argument is that those are the rudiments of a capitalist, of a socialist system, and that what is missing, and this is the argument, but what is missing from our indigenous economic system was technology. And once we put in technology and it comes to life, we can actually use it as an organizing principle to organize Africa. In the same way as the communists in China have been able to lift millions of people out of poverty because of the system. We'll come, this is not the time to go into that, but just making that point. Similarly, if we get African leaders that can take control of African society and use socialism as a system, they can lift Africans out of poverty. And so that is an argument for another day, though. Today, the question is, African Liberation Day, are we liberated? But Brother Pigeon says, no, we are not. And the time is 8:41. I have something to say as well, but I don't want to take too much time because I'm also chairing. So I'll just make a small point and say that the economic system we have today is, if you like, what we call, has corrupted the African political economy. When you talk about corruption in economic terms, it's not corruption where someone wants a contract and asks the other person for a cut before they award him or her the contract, or the government officer or a government minister being given a car, say by the Japanese or the Chinese or the British or the Americans, or money put into their bank account so that they can award a contract to this or that person. That is not what we mean by corruption in economic terms. What we mean by corruption in economic terms is this. The whole system has been so structured that it serves the interests and the welfare of foreigners. That is the corruption. And it's out of this fundamental corruption that you can understand all the other types of corruption, whether it is education, health, economics, and so on. Anyway, that is me done. I don't want to say anymore. We've got a few hands. Sister Tapua had a hand up, but she's put it down. There was another brother who put his hand up, but I think he's left the meeting. But Brother Prince has his hand up, so I'll let Brother Prince say a few words, and then we'll go to Sister Tapua, who wanted to present on economics. Yes, Brother Prince.
Yes, I just want to say that our economic system did not lack technology or do not lack technology, because we have our own technology. We cannot use the European or American standard to judge our technology. Because if you see how China developed, most of their industry started just like cottage industries, using Chinese technology. If you go to Malaysia or to Thailand or to Indonesia, you see that they are using their traditional technology and then innovating it for mass production. When I was growing up in my village, I used to see some of the old ladies spinning, cutting, producing fabrics. But today you will see that most of African fabrics are produced but in China. All this knowledge is no longer there. But if you go to China, you go to Malaysia, you see that these fabrics that are produced manually, as I'll call it, or with traditional machines, are more expensive. And you have people, that is what people want to buy. Somebody will go to the village where they know this is where these fabrics are produced traditionally, and they go and buy that one. Those ones, that's what they buy. All we need to do is just to promote our local technology and innovate if we really want to make it easily accessible to everybody and cheap. We just have to innovate. We have those technologies, because even when you want to go and see what we call the European or American technology, this like cryptocurrency and so on, these are all, they are scams, because people don't actually understand what is happening. How do they do it? They are scamming people. That is the way I'll put it. When you look at AI technology, yes, AI is some kind of fancy thing, but we all know the negative part of AI. It is not being promoted, but we know the effects. So our holistic technology can be promoted, and people will see the difference and can follow it. So all we need to do is promote our technology, because Africans, we still have the knowledge. If you go to all these big people promoting this technology, most of the brain behind it are still Africans. That is just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Brother Dr. Maha agrees with you. He says in the chat, what's needed is African socialism compounded with technology is what Africa needs. Just Brother Maha, it's not African socialism, you mean scientific socialism. That's what you mean. Capitalism is a man-eat-man society being bent on creating a few millionaires, a majority poor. Thank you. Sister Tapua, come in, please.
Thank you very much. I remember reading somewhere that how we were colonized, how we were so easily colonized, was based on our philosophy.
Sister Tapua,
Yes.
We were not so easily colonized, please. That's not correct.
Well, I said,
some
I
of our people
remember
fought.
reading
Some of our people
somewhere.
fought. Jaja
Yes.
Fopogu, he fought.
Yes.
So please,
Yes.
it wasn't that easy.
And my grandparents fought. Right.
So
we were on record for having
carry
given
on.
the Portuguese a hard time. That's why I said I remember reading somewhere. Because when the white men came, our belief is if you're born into this world, you're supposed to live on earth. You don't have to have a title deed. Because what do we mean when we say somebody does not own land or does not have a title deed? Where is this human person supposed to live? So when they came, if you walk into a village and you're looking for somewhere to stay, you are not denied because you're not fighting. So there was this contrast between the new economics and our economics, because our belief is you are because we are. If we throw you out, then it means we are also going to be in trouble. So I'm coming in with the idea that when we claim to be liberated as Africans, a lot of us as Africans have liberated ourselves politically to inherit an economic system that does not fit in with our philosophy at all, which is why we're struggling. Because we've got a few Africans who are super wealthy, and they will say we're liberated. Then we've got the mass of us all who now don't have land, as in the Zimbabwean context, because we claim that land was given back to the people. But which people? Because the majority are still where they were when the colonialists came. So my point is that until we come back with an economics that looks after the lowest, that follows the principles of our African philosophy, that I am because you are, that together we will be successful. Not the fact that Dangote has done this or has owned this. As long as this benefit is not percolating to the lowest of the low, then we are not liberated. It's just that the majority of the people don't realize how much power they have. Because the disparity between the rich and the poor, and then the politics that is played, for example, in my country, Zimbabwe, people will want to shut you up because Blacks now own the land. What do you want? And I'm looking at people who are surviving on less than $1 a day, and they're being convinced that if you don't go along with us, the white men will come back. And that's really sad. So until we realize and define what economic liberation is for us, then we're not going anywhere. I'm also going to link this with education. I kind of jumped when I realized that in the Zimbabwean context, you have people who was trying to infiltrate the system to try and get people to claim back their heritage, their culture, their identity. And there was something called color that was introduced into the education system. This was a curriculum that was asking people to know who they are, to get back to where we are, identify our groups, be strong in our tribal groups in order to form a strong unit. Because right now we're being divided because we've been told being African is nothing, being Black is nothing, everything about us. So in an effort to reclaim that, the government put in what they call the color. And there was a rebellion, a massive rebellion from the parents, because the parents were being asked questions that they couldn't answer about their own identity, because they had not learned about it even in the past education system. And the parents are saying, we're fighting for our kids to get jobs. You, government, continue to create jobs. So there's a gap between the parents and the economies that our new governments are trying to drive towards. Because the parents are still aspiring for the old system, for their kids to get into the old system and do well within that old system. They still want the competition. Hence, you have the massive migration that's happening in Zimbabwe from all sectors into Europe, back into slavery. This time we're going it on our own volition. And it's only when they get there that they realize what they've got themselves into. So, in conclusion, we are not liberated. I feel our liberation has to come from our own definition of economic success. It cannot be based on accumulation of wealth by the few. It has to be looking after everybody, just as we've always looked after all people. I think I'll end here.
Thank you, Sister Tapoa, for your presentation. We've got some few hands up. We've only got 6 minutes. This meeting will not go beyond 9 o'clock, I'm afraid. I am jealous when it comes to timekeeping. So those who will speak before we finish at 9. That's 9 London time, which is in 6 minutes. And any leftover conversation we'll pick up on Saturday. So we'll go in order. I'll call those who haven't spoken yet before I call those who have spoken. So Brother Carrington, you come in. Please be brief so Brother Coco can also say something and Brother Joseph can also say something. Thank you. Brother Carrington is our resident physicist for those of us who attend the Saturday classes, which we have suspended today in celebration of African Liberation Day. Yes, Brother Carrington.
Thank you very much. I'll be quick because of time, and maybe this can go into the next discussion on Saturday, possibly. My question here is to the point, are we liberated or not? If no, why and what will we do about it? If yes, what is the problem? If yes, we are liberated, could it be the problem that we are free but powerless, which ends up being emotionally no different from being under control? So what are we going to do about power so that we have an African empowerment? We celebrate an African Empowerment Day because there is no point being free without being empowered. And maybe that is the problem of the continent, not freedom, but power. Thank you.
Yes, Brother Carrington, economic power, empowerment. Brother Coco, please come in and also be as brief as you can so that we can hear from Brother Joseph.
Thank you very much, comrades. I am honored.
Brother Coco, you haven't stopped looking young.
Please stop flattering me.
I think Lesotho has done you a lot of good.
And a bit of Kenya.
Please take us with you when you are going next time.
I'll do that. Don't worry about it. Okay. A few points from me. Number one, Brother Pickton, stop calling me an economist. That is not a very good title. The big education we got, majority of us, it was meant to defend capitalism. Unfortunately, that's all it's meant. So the root problem here is the education. What are we educating our children to be? I like the presentation you made, Brother Pickbill, and the presentation that Sister Tapua has made. These are very important points you have put forward. And I think that is what we should be working on, our own systems. We can't use the foreign systems to liberate ourselves. So quick one here is that in my language, we say a hungry intestine does not have an ear. Lela pide, halina zebe. So what that means is, if you cannot feed the people, you cannot talk about being an economist. If we are economists, then we should be creating jobs for the people. We should be liberating the people. I think it's that time now. The political fathers did their job. Now it's the economic fathers to start thinking bigger about what we face. Otherwise, will continue being slaves. Another man said, the video I listened to today, you can be at peace, but still be a slave. But if you have your freedom, if you have your liberty, that's sufficient. You can have something about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've got 2 minutes to go, but let's hear from our own brother Joseph for about a minute before
Yeah.
we for today.
Yes, brothers and sisters, I'm disappointed that we haven't attended to the issue of health. The health is sufficiently enough, but because there's some issues, for instance, the loss of culture or knowledge. For instance, in midwifery, just recently I was reading an article based on the experience of people in the United States, African American, where because of the strict way they have imposed on delivery of babies and so on, the traditional way Africans was denied. So there's a loss of knowledge. But also in terms of the economics, we have to understand that economics as we have been taught is about scarcity. And I mean, to me, that's one of the biggest evils, to talk about scarcity in a world that's supposed to provide for everyone. And second, and thirdly, the issue of externalizing the cost of doing economic activity, not factoring that, so that you have a situation in Nigeria, Ogoniland, where the people suffer at the expense of, the people suffer at the gains of Shell and, of course, those puppets in power. So we have a serious situation, and we must abandon this concept of scarcity. And finally, we need to return what we call now economy, not necessarily the Western version, to where it is as a servant of the society or a servant of the ecology, and not the other way around. We are being slaves to the economy at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The time is now 9 o'clock, 10 seconds past, but I would like Dr. Piri to give us a summary view of all that he himself said and heard today. Then we close the meeting, and then we see you all on Saturday for a continuation of African Liberation Day celebration. Dr. Piri.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, summary view of all that you've heard today, and then we will close on that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. I think just in summary is the realization that on all the three topics that we touched, from education to health to the economy, we realize that Africa is still within a predicament where, in as much as there's been some gains in this process, but we are still at a loss. And one of the things that seems to be prevailing to all arguments seems to show that it seems like we are in a framework that have been made for us by the colonizers, that we are still within it. That's why we clamor to have our own systems, our own way of doing things. But so far, but what is good about it is, in as much as maybe we haven't progressed beyond this framework of subjugation, we have got now eyes to see that we are in this, we've got this, we are conscious enough of our predicament. And it seems like there is also hope that we are trying to find ways to break those barriers that are holding us. I think I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much. Brothers and sisters, you've heard it. You've heard Brother Dr. Piri summarize for us what he thought the presentation for today is. That is all we have for today. We thank you all for coming. We thank you all for joining us. We thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. We shall meet again on Saturday, same times as advertised on our poster, and we shall continue the discussion on the next three topics. Brother Pigeon, the next three topics are?
One is on the African military or military or warfare example. We are checking on military of Africa. The second thing will be looking at African politics and governance. And the third thing will be on Africa spirituality stroke, what they call religion. So that's the area we're going to focus on.
Excellent. Please note that today and Saturday is more hearing from those who have done research or experts on the various areas. And you notice that there's less discussion. That's because we wanted to hear from, we are celebrating, so we want to hear from our brothers and sisters who are experts on the topic. So Brother Joseph, sorry that there wasn't much discussion as you would have liked. If we like, we can take the discussions to the following Saturday and have discussions on what we've heard in the last 2 days. But today and Saturday is more of celebrating and hearing from our own brothers and sisters. So thank you very much. 9:03. Really sorry we've gone over time. Brother Pigeon, I think you can stop the recording now.